Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon and welcome to your Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting. Today is April 2nd. I'll call this meeting to order. Our first item of business is the City Council open discussion. Are there any items for open discussion? Councilor Staley.
First of all, I wanted to say that I was able to attend the first open meeting for the Event Center Study Task Force. I don't know that task force is the right word, study group. It was held at the old City Council chambers last Wednesday, and I'm just so grateful that we are opening this up for the citizens to be able to attend. I was disappointed there were only 4 chairs for citizens to sit at this meeting. TJ Nelson told me that they will be making better accommodations in the future. And also, I'm really grateful to a man that we're all familiar with, Bruce Danielson, who of his own time and assets came in and videotaped this so that the public could have a view of it after the fact. This man has done this of his own time for the last 8 years, and I've asked the mayor officially to have that documented and videotaped with city resources moving forward so that people can see the dialogue for themselves. So again, I'm really grateful that we're doing that. The other thing I wanted to talk about has to do with our own city council. And I told Councilor Christine Erickson we're gonna discuss this about the rotation that we're gonna have we go to the National League of Cities every fall. And 4 of our council members went last year, and there's 3 going this year. So I would like to recommend that the 4 who went last year, to be fair, to decide which one wants to go. If there are two who want to go, that we would draw lots, that you would draw lots to do that.
Say that again.
As I said to you in the email yesterday.
Yeah, I know. Say it again, though.
So that if there are, of the 4 who went last year, and apparently there's really no ranking system on that. There's been really no policy that if there's more than 2 people who want to go, that you draw lots to see.
Are you suggesting 3 or 4 go like last year? Last year was the first time we've sent 4.
4, yeah, and 3 people have already said they want to go. Councilor Kurt Sale apparently doesn't want to go. So there's going to be, that's what we heard.
Correction. I cannot attend because I do not have enough vacation left. It's not that I don't want to go.
What you've said you are not going to go.
I cannot attend.
Okay. So there's there would be a vacant spot. So, and the list came out, and Councilor Erickson, your name was at the top of the list.
My name is not at the top of the list. I actually was the 4th one down. The way, if the council doesn't mind, I'll just kind of give a little history on tradition and ask Councilor Kiley, since we've been here and seen the tradition of it. So by tradition, the way that it has worked is just rotation. We're all grown-ups. We've worked through a rotation, and if someone decides to not go because it doesn't work into their schedule, etc., then they would then be first up. So Councilor Sale cannot go this year. It does not work into his schedule. Next year when it comes up, he would have first right because he has not been before. And it would be that way until he chooses to go. He would have the first choice. Essentially, it's just, if you look at the sheet that David Bixler sent out, it will go through how many years folks have served and how many trips they've been on. And really, it's just a fairness as far as how many years you've served and going through that rotation, essentially. So, for example, when you look at the list, Councilor Brecky has been not on for a full year, but she's been once, so she's essentially 100%. Myself, I have been 2 times out of 6 years. I have shown interest in wanting to go this time. Councilor Kiley has been 2 times out of 6 years. Councilor Neitzer has been once with an interest of going an additional time, and it goes through the list as far as that staff by themselves rotates to whomever it works for their schedule and their personal schedules as well with their families, and they choose who goes. And so by tradition, we have done it based on who's been last and how many years and whatever, and it's just really just a generic kind of rotation down as far as who wants to go. So essentially this year, it's Kurt, you, Pat,
Yes.
and Greg who
That's right.
have
Priority.
first right. So from there, if any of those people say no, it would go to whomever would be up that hasn't gone in the longest amount of time versus served. So I don't want to complicate it. We can certainly talk later, and I can explain it to you in more detail.
No, Counselor Erickson, I don't need it explained in more detail. This would be your third trip. It would be Counselor Brecky's second trip. It would be Counselor Kiley's second trip. And it would be Counselor Selberg's second trip.
Correct.
So I think, to be fair, and your name somehow came at the top of the list as going.
I would be happy to share the
and
email with everyone. My name is not first.
Your name was first. We got two lists. The
not
first one
first.
is, yes.
The first one, it goes to Marshall and Rick. My name is third on the list. Council Brecky's was fourth on the list because she just went and she's been on 1 year.
Right.
So out of fairness of how many years you're elected, it's one trip to one trip. It's simple math is really all is how it's
I
done.
think it would be fair, I'll just put this in as, and maybe we need to have an ordinance or some kind of a resolution to address this, but just in fairness, moving forward, that you draw lots. If you've all been to the convention the year before, then let's just draw lots to see who gets to go the next year.
There's been other item. Go ahead, Councilor Kiley.
If I may, the budget analyst sent out information, and whether you count this next November's round of National League City trips or not, the rotation is very clear. Since Councilor Sale is unable to go, it would then go to Councilor Selberg because he's only gone once. And I don't have that in front of me right now, but anyway, then I think it's between the two of us next, based on just a ratio. It's simple math. Drawing lots, while it's not necessarily going to happen that way, but by drawing lots, you could have the same person go year after year after year. It's just not a lot.
I'm talking
Counselor,
about.
I have the floor. It's just logical to go by the rotation that we currently have in place. And it's just simple mathematics. And so I think I would encourage you to look at Mr. Bixler's spreadsheet.
And, okay, now I will have the floor, and
Is there anybody else, before we go back to Councilor Staley, anybody else?
Do we have a rotation that we've been going with for a long time? Okay, and we had a problem with this before?
No.
Okay. I'm fine with the rotation. Thank you.
Councilor Staley, would you like to say anything else?
Yes, I would say that we did have a big discussion about this last summer, about who was going to go. So, Councilor Selberg, yes, maybe you weren't in on the email exchanges, but we did talk about this.
Asked if there was a problem with the rotation.
We were talking about rotation and who was going to go next. So, what I'm saying is not mathematics, and I was told by Dave Bixler that he was told by leadership to redo the list. He's doing what he's told. We've seen two lists, so I just think in fairness, it would be fair to draw lots in this instance.
And if you read the email, he said that he inadvertently set out the wrong list. That was by tradition. It was done on accident to where he had made a mistake, and it wasn't a big deal. Last year, the discussion was about, Councilor Brecky suggested having a fourth person. That was our conversation. It wasn't about the rotation. It was about, should we have 3 or 4? Councilor Brecky brought forth a resolution that was supported by the council, and we did send 4 versus 3. It was never about the rotation. That seemed to work just fine. So that's where we're at.
Well, I still think the fair thing would be to draw lots. That's what I'm going to say.
Okay, thanks for your opinion. We're going to move to the next item up. If there's any other open discussion? Seeing none, we're going to move to CVB Strategic Plan by Terry Schmidt. Welcome. As Terry comes up, I'll just remind the council that Councilor Starr is absent right now, and he will give his update on the CCOG next week, unless Councilor Staley would like to give it in his place.
No, that's fine. We'll wait till next week.
Thank you, Terry. You may lower those. Just don't put them too close together, or we get too much feedback. Thank you.
How's that? Good afternoon. Terry Schmidt with the Sioux Falls CVB. Councilor Starr had asked me to come and give a report on our strategic plan. And then after speaking again yesterday, we determined that I'd give you a very brief report today because we're really not ready to give the full report out yet. But let me just share a few things with you briefly. The purpose of our strategic plan, of course, was that we hadn't done one for many, many years. We'd done sales updates and marketing updates, but we hadn't done a full strategic plan. We wanted to better position the CVB for sales and marketing into the future so that we would be far more aggressive. We'd have the ability to know more about who our markets are and such. So we started out, of course, thinking the first thing that we need is a lot of research. The process started a year ago, this month ago, last February. We hired the Coraggio Group out of Portland, Oregon. They're very well known in the CVB world and the tourism world for doing strategic planning. They came in last February, started with a visioning group. Then we moved to surveys, several focus groups and work groups. And after several meetings, we have a work group that then put the final priorities and such together, and then the staff stepped in and wrote all the steps that would take to accomplish each of those goals and strategies. The summary has come from Coraggio after a lot of stakeholder involvement. It has been presented to the executive committees of the CVB Council and the bid board. It's a 3 to 5 year plan. We are now putting the final touches on it and really specifying the steps and finalizing the steps that it will take to accomplish each one of those goals. A little sneak peek of what it did say in the report. We did come up with a vision statement that everyone has agreed upon, and I think and hope that you will agree with what it is too, and it's a really, really tough one. The vision statement is, we want to share the city of Sioux Falls with the world. It's just that simple. And then our mission statement is to market Sioux Falls as a one-of-a-kind destination and provide an energized experience to enhance economic impact. And our biggest word that came out of the whole strategic plan for us as staff is that we are going to be more bold. For some people, that might be an oh no, and to some others, it will be great. So we're looking forward to being more bold in our sales and marketing. With that, I will look forward to coming back to you in the coming months and giving a more detailed presentation and be able to share with you the actual action steps that we'll take to accomplish what the strategic plan has laid out. Any questions?
Thank you, Terry. Any questions for Terry? Thank you for the update. We look forward to having additional presentations when everything is complete. Thank you. All right, next item we will move up is administration goals. Chief of Staff Erica Beck, welcome. I know you have a few guests in the audience as well.
Yes, thank you for having me, Erica Beck, Mayor's Office. With me today in the audience are several members from our various departments to assist with whatever questions that you might have in regards to this presentation. So thank you again for having us. I will warn you that I do have a number of slides, so I'm going to try to talk a little bit fast to get through all of them in the time frame that I have allotted to me. So if you do have questions, please stop me and we can certainly address them throughout the presentation as opposed to all at the end. All right, the term BHAG, or Big, Hairy, Audacious Goal, was first coined by the author Jim Collins. He's the writer of several different books, including the book Built to Last. According to Collins, highly visionary organizations use bold goals as a mechanism to stimulate progress. A true BHAG is clear and compelling, and it engages people. It reaches out and grabs them in the gut. It is tangible, energizing, and highly focused. People get it right away, and it takes little or no explanation. Late last year, Mayor Tenhaken asked each of our directors within the city to work collaboratively to identify their own department or cross-departmental BHAGs. We currently, across all of our departments, have identified 30 BHAGs that align to our One Sioux Falls framework. So that's what we're going to go through today, are those 30 BHAGs or those 30 goals. In September of last year, you might remember Mayor Tenhaken unveiling the One Sioux Falls framework, which is on the slide in front of you. The BHAGs that we have identified across all of our departments fall into at least one of those categories within that One Sioux Falls framework, and in many cases, the BHAGs touch on 2 or more. This framework was developed to help shape policies and provide focus to the city employees for priorities. The One Sioux Falls framework was developed with input from the public and city employees. It also helps set expectations for the council, community organizations, and the public for the priorities of the mayor and the administration. As the administration sets its strategic goals for the coming years, those plans will fall within this framework. Each slice of the inner pie represents an area in which the city will focus, all under the umbrella of innovation and investments in foundational growth for our growing community. So let's start with the first piece of the pie, safety and health. The vision of the safety and health tenet is to provide a safe community in which the health and well-being of our citizens is above the national average. So some of the BHAGs that we've identified within the city addressing this particular tenet include, first and foremost, the Public Safety Training Center. Our police and fire and rescue teams are ranked among the best in the nation, and we want to continue moving in that direction. So addressing the ongoing need for training and development is key within this safety and health initiative. One critical means of doing this involves opening, of course, of this new public safety training center for our law enforcement and our fire teams. This facility is currently on target for an opening in 2021. Second BHAG under this tenet is the triage center. Many of you are familiar with the triage center concept. It is a true community-wide and innovative effort. The launch of this center will require multiple partnerships within and external to government. The goal with launching the triage center is to reduce emergency department utilization due to addiction and mental illness by 25% and get people in need of care on the right path to treatment. Currently, we're targeting opening of a facility, of the triage center facility in 2020. You all will be hearing more about the triage center at the April 23rd informational meeting, at which Director Pritchett in the finance office will talk through the department's monthly finance budget, but we'll also talk through our recommendations associated with the surplus funds from 2018 and how a portion of those could be potentially utilized to carry forward this triage center concept. Our police department team is also focused on individuals struggling with mental health issues. They have identified the goal of adding 2 specially trained community resource officers to reduce the number of arrests and the use of force and SWAT in call-out situations that are related to mental health and suicide subjects. Next on the list under safety and health, the police department also has a goal of increasing the focus on human trafficking and prostitution stings by 200%, which will require additional FTEs for that department. So hopefully as you're listening to these goals that I'm talking about, I'm identifying, this will then carry forward to some of the discussions that we bring to you with respect to the budget. So just as you're thinking about this and as you're listening to this, understand that all of these things are aligning to that One Sioux Falls framework, and that will also align to the budget that we eventually present to you all as well. Next on the list is the neighborhood speed reduction. Very critical to the safety of our community is the need to address additional neighborhood preservation, which includes ensuring our streets are safe for both pedestrians and vehicles. In order to reduce speeding on neighborhood streets, our Public Works team has developed a BHAG to implement 3 to 4 speed reduction zones within our community that will reduce calls and citations in each identified zone by 50%. Of course, with the idea that if those are successful, they can be picked up and taken to other locations as well. Next on the list is enhancing community risk reduction. Our fire rescue team will rebrand fire prevention to infuse the community risk reduction model into all divisions of fire rescue and implement data analytics applications to drive department decisions by the end of this year. Transitional neighborhoods. Using data and our 20+ different neighborhood associations within the city of Sioux Falls, a cross-departmental team of city staff will identify a transitional neighborhood where we can place intentional focus on activities and improvements that will help reduce code enforcement complaints, maintain or increase property values, and decrease police service calls within that neighborhood. Again, another really great way that we can showcase how this could be utilized with a neighborhood that might be transitioning and pick it up and take it to another neighborhood in the future, especially with those items that we find to be successful. All right, our One Sioux Falls framework also includes a focus on accessible housing. Ensuring that we have a comprehensive approach to providing housing options that are accessible to all income levels within our community is vital. Not only do we intend to address connecting people to resources, we also know that it is crucial that there are enough resources to connect them to, which is why one of the mayor's office BHAGs is to develop a 2022 accessible housing strategy that outlines our plan for working collaboratively with the private sector and our nonprofit community to preserve existing housing stock and construct 1,000 dwelling units over the course of the next 4 years. Our new housing manager, which I wasn't going to point her out necessarily, but if you would wave, Shelley Unruh, will be making her debut, I believe, at next week's council meeting, at the informational meeting, to talk a little bit more about this strategy and the first piece of that, which is going to be our first housing summit that we will be holding on May 9th of this year, in which we will invite the public, different stakeholders within the housing industry, and all of you, of course, to participate so that we can put together a strategy that's meaningful for everyone. Multiple departments will be involved in an effort to establish a housing clinic. This clinic will triage the housing needs of Sioux Falls, serving as a one-stop shop for our residents. Not only will this effort require the collaboration of multiple internal teams, but we will also work hand in hand with external partners, such as Thrive and their Housing Action Team, Minnehaha County, and many other nonprofits to bring this concept to life. Lastly, within the framework of affordable housing, it's also critical that we work diligently to maintain our existing housing stock. This in part means that we must place emphasis on building and maintaining productive relationships with our local landlords. Through these efforts, our Planning and Development Services team and our Health Department's teams have identified a goal to see voluntary rental registrations increase by 25% over the next 4 years. The city plays a critical role, as you are all aware, in ensuring that our community remains a place that people desire to live, work, and play. Our efforts in these areas will assist us in keeping our youth here in the community, as well as recruiting workforce for our many growing businesses and institutions in Sioux Falls. The mayor's office, in collaboration with both internal and external stakeholders, will develop a 2022 downtown development strategy by August of this year, so 2019, to outline public investment into downtown for the next 4 years. This strategy is important because it will leverage public investment to target a private investment of $250 million over that time and a nonprofit investment of $50 million over that time. So again, we're talking about ways that we can leverage our public funds and the projects that we are bringing forward to you for consideration to see additional private growth happen within our community. One of these projects that's specific to downtown is the Downtown River Greenway. That's been identified by our Parks and Recs team as a BHAG with the goal of seeing it completed by 2022. And I'm sorry, I should point out this is phase 3 of the Downtown River Greenway, not the Downtown River Greenway in its entirety. Through this project's completion, we anticipate that the private sector will invest over $150 million alone with the completed first phase of redevelopment at the Sioux Steel property. Design for phase 3 of the River Greenway is currently underway. Entertainment venues. So we have 2 BHAGs in this area. Another BHAG that's being led out of the mayor's office is to develop a 20-year master plan for this campus by the fall of 2019. This kicked off, of course, with the formation of the Events Campus Study Group. This group has been tasked with developing a series of recommendations for the mayor's office that will be used to formulate our master plan. We look forward to executing that plan with the council's support and public buy-in in the years and decades to follow. The second BHAG within this entertainment venue area is from our finance department. They've set a bold BHAG for entertainment venues, which falls under their scope of work. Finance seeks to achieve break-even combined net operating results for the city's 6 entertainment venues by 2022. Some work is already in motion for this BHAG moving forward. The Events Campus Master Plan will play a key role in this as we seek to better use that campus to generate revenue. And we are also in the process of how the Orpheum Theater could operate under the management of the Washington Pavilion, which has proven, of course, to be itself a successful downtown performing arts operator. The health department is the first department within the city to achieve its BHAG, or one of their BHAGs. And in February, as this picture shows in front of you, Sioux Falls became part of the AARP Age-Friendly Community Network. As a member, Sioux Falls gains access to global resources and information on age-friendly best practices, models of assessment and implementation, and the experiences of towns and cities around the world. Participating communities in the age-friendly network commit to improving their livability through the assessments of needs, development of an action plan, and implementation of new projects and programs, and ongoing assessment. The livability indicators are planned, implemented, and progress is assessed in 3 phases over a 5-year period, with continued cycles of assessment and improvement thereafter. The 5G network launch. By February of 2021, our goal is to deploy an active 5G network within the city of Sioux Falls, or Sioux Falls city limits, I should say, providing better connectivity to residents as well as business with an ultra-low latency and high-speed network, which will equip Sioux Falls as being a community that's ready to welcome tech companies and cybersecurity companies to our economic portfolio. Early literacy skills. The library department will grow a successful future workforce by increasing the early literacy skills of children entering school from 68% to 72% by 2022. Currently, Sioux Falls third graders have a reading proficiency rate of 44%, which is behind the state rate of 49%. Most students can catch up by middle school, but the potential to excel starts at infancy, which the library knows and want to play a role within. Therefore, they're pushing us to be better by pursuing this goal. As we all know, the Sioux Falls Park and Rec system is an incredible asset to the health, well-being, and overall aesthetics of our community. The Park and Rec department have identified another BHAG in which they will continue to grow their assets by facilitating $10 million in private contributions into our park and recreational system by 2022. That's a pretty incredible BHAG. Not that they're not all incredible, but that one sticks out, I think.
Some are hairier than others.
The Workforce Guidance Office. Working with our higher educational institutions in Sioux Falls, we will provide support and establishment of a workforce guidance office that will have an enhanced focus on our diverse populations within the city. The goal is to provide service to 2,500 people by May of 2022. Bond ratings. The finance department has a goal to achieve a Moody's AA1 rating, which we're currently AA2, for sales tax revenue bonds by 2021. This, again, currently we're at AA2. They will also aim for a Moody's AAA underlying credit rating by 2023 for the entirety of the city of Sioux Falls. This is currently at AA1. Achieving these higher bond ratings will be a long-term savings for taxpayers as it opens up lower bond interest rates for the city. And I should say that Director Pritchett, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon how you look at it, came in at the very tail end of this BHAG process. And so he signed on to ownership of this BHAG without really being involved in the development of it. But thank you to Tom Huber for bringing that concept forward and for really pushing us to think outside of the box. The final tenet, and arguably the most of the One Sioux Falls framework, is engagement of people. The city aims to engage, collaborate, and partner with the community to solve our challenges and, of course, seize our opportunities. Our Innovation and Technology Department is leading this effort to identify measurable data that can be presented in a dashboard format on our city's website, which is what you're seeing in front of you today on the screen. This data will provide an opportunity for our citizens to connect with city government in an easily accessible and understandable way. We are targeting next week to launch this dashboard with 9 key performance indicators, and we will grow those KPIs, or those key performance indicators, over time based on public media and stakeholder feedback. So again, thinking about those very common types of statistics that you all get asked about, or that you're wondering about, or that we often get asked about within the administration, those are the types of inputs that we want to provide within this dashboard moving forward. Also specific to engagement is employee engagement. High employee engagement is critical to the effectiveness and the value of city employees to serving Sioux Falls. Engaged employees are more productive, dedicated, they work safer, and they provide better customer service and stay with the organization longer. A common phrase of Mayor Tenhaken is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. For several years, the city has not measured its employee engagement. Last year, the city piloted a software program called Pecan as a means to measure engagement and provide insights to leaders within specific departments. This month, we are launching that Pecan software citywide amongst our employees. It is our goal to achieve an employee engagement score of 85% or better by 2021. 85% is an aggressive goal, but we feel it's achievable. According to Gallup, only 34% of employees are engaged, which can cause several internal issues that negatively impact an organization's ability to perform. Healthy and high-achieving organizations have at least 70% engagement. The next BHAG is focused on our customer service and creating a customer-centered government strategy. Our Planning and Development Services Department will pilot this effort and be focused on maintaining a 90% satisfaction rating with their wide range of customers. The strategy that they develop will certainly not be specific to only their department, but will contain ideas and initiatives that all of our departments can glean and utilize within their own areas in order to ensure that we're providing the best customer service possible. The Public Works team will be diligently working to implement a centralized phone number for the city. They will track and analyze the call volumes from that phone number and utilize that to determine how we can even continue looking at additional centralized phone numbers within the remainder of the city so that we can provide that ease of access again to our customers moving forward. Fire Rescue will be placing additional focus on increasing their public engagement to expand the diversity and inclusion of their recruitment efforts within their department. Again, this is a great means of piloting this effort in the city with the intent of incorporating their successful recruitment efforts citywide. All right, so I know I went through those very quickly, but I want to just thank you all for listening and having us come forward and talk about what some of these goals are that we've been working on cross-departmentally in the administration. Because I do think that moving forward as we begin to present some of our priorities with respect to surplus funds, our recommendations with respect to the budget to you all, this will help provide some of that guidance as to where those ideas are coming from. Each of our departments has so many different assessments that they work on, master plans that they focus on that really feed into these different goals and BHAGs, along with all the expertise, of course, within our citizenry and our city staff. So please remember, of course, that if you have any questions after this presentation, we're happy to get together with any of you at any time and talk more thoroughly about each of these goals. Many of the goals have not been thoroughly vetted in terms of a detailed plan on how we're going to achieve that goal, but we want to certainly include you all in that process as you deem appropriate. So thank you. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or again, we do have a large audience here today to provide some more detailed responses as well.
Great, thank you, Chief of Staff Beck. Any questions by the council? Councilor Kiley.
Thank you for the presentation. A lot of big, hairy, audacious goals there. As I mentioned to Councilor Sales, some hairier than others.
Correct. Yeah.
But one of the simple, what I think is fairly simple and should have been implemented long ago, is the centralized phone number. So I commend you for placing that as a goal. It'll just make it that much easier for our citizens to contact who they actually need to contact. And I think the presentation of your goals comes at a timely point here, because later in our agenda here, we're going to be discussing some of our own goals as a council too. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Councilor Staley.
Erica, tell us a little bit more. What are the specifics of the neighborhood speed reduction?
Yes. So I don't believe we have anyone here from Public Works, and if we do, they can certainly chime into this as well. But ultimately, what they want to do is identify very key specific areas within the city in which they can set up some speed reduction zones, so they can target areas in which maybe the police department have seen a number of complaints associated with speeding, and then are there different ways from a public works standpoint that we can look at improvements to streets that would reduce that speeding, and then can we showcase through data that that's successful, and then potentially take it to other neighborhoods as well.
So you're planning to rework the streets? I mean, how does that look?
Sure. I'll give you an example.
Like let me give you a street that's really notorious for speeding is over on Kiwanis Avenue. You know, where people are coming over a hill, and they're, you know, I hear a lot of complaints about that. So like on that kind of a stretch, what would you do to that?
Sure. Well, I can't give you specific concepts for Kiwanis Avenue. I'd like to play engineer sometimes, but I'm not an engineer, so I'll let them look at that specifically. But let me give you an example. So 10th and 11th Streets in Pettigrew Heights, as they come into and out of downtown, those also have a lot of complaints on them with respect to speeding. And so one of the things that we're looking at with our engineering team, and specifically Heath Hofteaser, is how can we try to drive some of that speeding down by even looking at methods of incorporating additional bump outs at the corners of the intersections, potentially even looking at road diets, things that we can do to pilot to see if they work and they help reduce that speeding through those areas. So we would initially look at opportunities and things that we could invest in that would give us the data and the feedback needed to make more permanent solutions in the future. So it can be a multitude of different things that could be done, whether it's infrastructure improvements or simple signage.
Well, and with the signage, we're actually going to be, it was one of the things I had suggested on the budget issue, was more of those solar speed signs, because I've heard that they really do work. And especially when you have the speed limit itself posted on top, and then people just become aware of what their own speed is. And so that's really a low-cost way of doing that. A second thing I'd like to ask, and I've got a few more, but I can defer to others right now. But what do you mean by preserve existing housing stock? And how does that, if at all, does that connect to the issue we had over by Avera, where we have existing housing stock that, of course, is not being preserved on that Avera campus?
Sure. I won't speak specifically to the Avera campus housing. I think this is more comprehensive citywide strategy. So, of course, we want to preserve as much existing housing stock as possible. We also want to look at ways that we can construct new housing stock within our core neighborhoods, especially on vacant lots, in order to ensure that we're getting that reinvestment into our core neighborhoods. So we know that we need a simultaneous plan put together, and that's part of developing this strategy. So yes, we have some ideas on how we can preserve that existing housing stock, but partially why we're going to have this housing summit on May 9th is so that we can learn from all of these industry leaders within our community and glean from those ideas and those opportunities that they might present to us to develop a strategy that will showcase how we can specifically preserve that existing housing stock. One idea that I will share with you is we recently had a conversation with a gal who is looking at moving 2 of the homes at the Avera campus onto vacant lots that she currently owns. I take that back. They're not vacant lots. They're lots in which there are a couple of really dilapidated garages that she would remove and put these homes on. The cost of moving the homes is quite considerable. So one of the things that we've talked about is how can we look at our existing housing budget and understand whether or not we have any opportunities to assist in the move of those homes so that we can keep them within our community. So that would be one way that we could help preserve some of that existing housing stock that already is here within Sioux Falls.
Right, just the terminology existing housing stock to me sounds like you're talking about you're preserving a house that's there.
Correct.
Right, so not new houses. Okay. I have a few more questions, but.
Counselor Neitzer.
I love the neighborhood speed reduction as well. And really another way you could put this is walkability, because they go hand in hand.
Correct.
And I see health nodding over there, because that's key to them, and so is Public Works. And that has to do with how you design the roads in the first place.
Correct.
Speed signs are important, and they can work, but there's all kinds of things we can do, as simple as lane lines, parking lines, making the lanes narrower, bump outs, islands in the middle of intersections, designing the roads in such a way that we say we are going to prioritize walkability and safety first in neighborhoods. It's not a speedway. We're going to make you drive slow, and it's going to be designed in a way that the cues give you that indication so that you drive that speed. And sometimes it's as simple as instead of a 12-foot lane, it's a 10-foot lane, things like that.
Correct.
So there's all kinds of things you can do. So I love that, so I want to be involved in that. The other question I had, and there's so many good ones, but I'll just stick to one. I'm looking at the library one, and that had to do with the early childhood literacy. And I think that's great. I think, and maybe the library is already has ways that they're working on this, but it seems to me that you need to figure out how to drive the at-risk populations to those programs, because for like my family, for example, we were taking our daughter to these things, but we weren't necessarily the at-risk population. So how do you get those kids there so you can close that gap early, and then we're not playing catch up when they're in the 3rd and the 4th grade? Because a lot of us self-select and we're taking our kids to this, but there's a lot that for whatever reason they're not. How do you, do we transport them there? Do we, how do we do that? And are we doing that already?
If we have time, I'd like to invite Director Fick up. I think she can speak to this in a more educated fashion and answer your question.
Sure.
Okay.
I would just add on Counselor Neitzert's question as far as the connection to the school district, if there is any connection to the school district, that those kiddos that are at risk of falling behind the literacy, if there are communicated with in a different way of how you identify and get folks there.
Yeah.
Jody Fick, Director of the Library, and
Jenna Negebauer, Early Learning Librarian.
right, and this really is a BHAG. We got challenged to do something that's really beyond what you could do. I dream big, and to think that to actually make this work means connecting with families who aren't necessarily coming to us, connecting to those at risk. Right now, we're doing a lot of training with our staff, but we're also gathering together ideas from other libraries as to how they have tackled this. One that I just shared with the staff this week was a library, Enoch Pratt Library. They are doing story times and reading centers in laundromats. So they're looking at where are places, your at-risk families, where are they going, where are they spending their time, and what can we do to connect where they're at, because they aren't coming to us. So that takes some partnerships with laundromats, setting up, see what we can do with that. How can we get parents to have the resources to reach their kids in the time that they have? So, and I'm going to let Jenna talk a little bit too.
Something we additionally look at is in South Dakota, we have a really high percentage of working parents. Both parents work outside of the home. So it's also working with those families that work, and it's that time piece and making those connections. So we've started with our staff training and putting literacy components into the programs that we are doing, and then we're also doing those assessments at how can we meet people where they're at. We're going to do some of those things by offering programs outside of working hours and also going to where people are at. So we're in the beginning stages of that, but we're really excited for the possibilities.
And then the other piece that we're doing is working at training our daycare providers so that what they're doing with the kids is actually useful with the literacy stuff, because there's very specific things that you can do that prepare you for school versus just having the TV on in front of the kids. So we have 18 different facets of this as to what we're doing, including connecting with schools, connecting with daycares, how we can all get together on this, and how we can get every one of you to just encourage people to read to their kids 15 minutes a day. It's as simple as that. So,
I love it. I love the idea of going to where they're at. That's brilliant. Thanks.
Councilor Brecky?
I was going to ask you just a little bit more about the housing goals. One time when we were talking about TIFs, you had educated us on TIFs, and you had talked about the possibility of using TIFs to, creating TIF districts for rehabilitation in the core neighborhoods, and kind of in addressing the housing issue at the same time. I wrote that down with an asterisk, and it's kind of been logged in my head ever since. I mean, I'm hoping that that's part of the, again, I realize you're not at that detailed place yet, but are you considering that, using those in that way, in these neighborhoods? Really, I see it as two circles. We've got the core where we're going to try to do really the retail, and pedestrian explosion. But, if in order to service that, then we need to really, be focusing on that second circle where those people can live and hopefully walk to work or bike to work or, get to work without extending transit services out so far. And that involves, really kind of being, really focused on those neighborhoods. I've actually talked to the same two developers that visited with all of us, I think, this last week, the ones that are doing the project in here, the Greenway project, and then the other one that's kind of on the table about that, because I think they would agree that, they're creating a bigger service industry downtown, so they're going to need to, to support that, with the populace. The closer we can get those people to them, the better. So can you just tell me, has that been kind of discussed, and is that part of the bigger issue you're trying to address?
Yes, and I mean, I think we have to look at whatever tools we have available to us right now that we can utilize to spur our strategy with respect to housing. So absolutely TIF is on the table, and in multiple different, in multiple facets, meaning that, we need to look at sustainable revenue streams that we can utilize for the purposes of creating housing. Because the costs of building single-family housing, as an example, continue to increase. And really the cost of construction in general continue to increase, right? So we have to look at sustainable revenue streams that we can utilize to help with this strategy. And one of those sustainable revenue streams is the public benefit that can often come with a TIF. And so without getting too complicated, there are ways that we can take a portion of TIF increment off of a project in the future and align it to this strategy, even if it doesn't include the specific housing component within the TIF district itself. And so I'm throwing that out there as a concept for you to start thinking about, because as we begin to talk about these different strategies associated with housing, downtown development, workforce, growth. Any of the things that we're talking about require sustainable revenue streams. And so we have to start thinking about that now, and that's certainly something that we will start considering as we put together more detailed plans associated with this strategy moving forward. But to your point, with respect to the specific areas, we would certainly look at that as an opportunity. We need to garner enough increment to make it work, but that's certainly something that we can look at.
I was thinking just specifically to the east, of the whole rail yard development, the Sioux Steel development. If you just look behind there, you've got that mixed use kind of area back there that is struggling. And so that would be kind of an ideal place to just take a look at that and see if that might work in that area.
Definitely.
Councilor Silberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Erica. And I'm sorry if I'm going to have you repeat something here if I wasn't listening close enough, but when we're talking about initiatives or like mental health focus, what initiatives are we looking at in that area again, aside from obviously the triage centers coming up?
Yep, so the triage center is, probably one of our main focuses, to be quite honest with you. It really touches multiple departments. But in addition to that, one that we had talked about or that I had mentioned was our police department. It's also focused on individuals that are struggling with mental health issues. So looking at additional FTEs that they can bring on board, that would be specially trained community resource officers that would focus in on assisting in situations that maybe otherwise they would bring in SWAT for. So some of those suicide mental health types of scenarios in which they would typically bring in SWAT or other less trained mental health providers or FTEs, they would look at bringing in additional people that could be specially trained in this and help move it forward successfully without having to call in reinforcements.
Okay. And that's terrific. I'm assuming that range, though, that particular subject has a lot of potential and possibilities for, when you say focus, that obviously that's a big one right now. So I'm just curious. I mean, I think I heard you touch on that when you presented, but are there lots of opportunities?
There are, actually next week, I believe, the health department, Jill, Alicia, and Mary will most likely be here, and I believe it's next week, so you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but to talk about their announcement yesterday associated with the community health status report that was just released, and that's a partnership between the city and the two major healthcare providers. But within that, it talks a lot about different ways in which the community can engage that topic of mental health. And so there will absolutely be initiatives and actions that I would assume come from that, whether that's from the city or from those health institutions as well. Probably first and foremost, our priority is to get that triage center operational so that we have better data that we can glean from and know and better understand how to work from in the future. So that triage center is key to us moving forward with additional initiatives.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Sale.
Thank you, Erica. I just have one observation and don't expect a response. And I've mentioned this to the mayor on several occasions that one Sioux Falls is great. It's not achievable if we do not have labor peace. If every 2 years the Fraternal Order of Police comes for us and we're at impasse, we have a large group of city employees that are disgruntled, one Sioux Falls will not be achievable. So I would hope that in the next 18 months that the administration tries to amend those things and try and make it so that 2 years or 18 months from now, we come forward with a contract for the FOP.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Staley.
Well, thank you, Councilor Sale, for that, because I agree with that. The priorities are important. Erica, how much are you planning on budgeting for the River Greenway out of that second penny?
I can't tell you at this point because we're just in the design phase right now. So I can't tell you necessarily what that'll be at this point until we get further on in that process.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you, and we're going to be talking about the budget priorities here, which I don't see all of them listed on here either, but streets, of course, is at the very top of that list. And I think these are all great. But at the end of the day, we need to be adding even more and more energy into our citizens and getting feedback from them, their customer satisfaction. You use the word customer, thank you for that. We can have all the grandiose plans in the world, but it's about the average citizens who are paying tax dollars, and they're seeing their property taxes going up every year, and quality of life isn't necessarily getting better for some of them. And so having access through the apps or phone calls or whatever is going to be key, in my opinion. And let me just say a word, and I see Jason Reisdorfer sitting out there, about apps. A lot of people my age and older aren't comfortable with apps. So we got to be careful about directing all the input into that kind of technology, because a lot of people are going to want to be able to pick up the phone. Maybe they'll do an email. But listening from the public about what their experience is key. And I will say just some basic things like we're talking about millions of dollars maybe for the River Greenway project. We're talking about the downtown development. I've been advocating for Project Trim to get some money so that we don't put that on the backs of those average citizens on fixed incomes. Hey, citizens, you take care of your own trees. We can't afford to handle this, but we can't afford to do all this development downtown. And so that only builds to the disconnect within our community, if you understand. So I'm just looking for ways that we can go back to the people and say, hey, we're adding even more money into helping you with this. I love the safety on our streets, the speed, just ABCs of what it is to be a citizen in our community. Scoop It program disappeared. You know, what are we doing to help these people who are really kind of falling in the cracks? So if we have enough money to do these other things, I think we have enough money to make these things happen. Keep outdoor swimming pools and service all of our people. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I mean, obviously your guys' input is important. We hear a lot of feedback from just the various boards and so forth that we represent and that are mayoral appointed boards and committees. So we have many different facets in which we can gain that feedback, but you all represent very distinct populations within our community as well. And so we need your feedback into this process too. So thank you, Councilor.
Well, and thank you for, if I may say, thank you for bringing that up, because we all are moving into the community. We all move in different circles. Some of us are on the upper echelon, the elite, maybe more wealthy people. Some of us are moving amongst the commoners. So we all bring something to the table, and thank you for acknowledging that. And I hope the mayor listens to that, and I hope his staff is listening too, because we all have something to contribute. We're all important here. That is what I call one Sioux Falls.
Councilor Neitzer.
I just had one other question. Parks and Recreation private investment, is that sponsorships, or is that more like, I just saw, I think in the last month, a developer donated a gazebo at a park. And it's just going to be, I think, for the public use, just because he was doing a good thing.
Both of those examples are great examples of their BHAG to really drive $10 million in private contributions into our park system. So that can come in a multitude of different ways, but both of those examples would be fits within this.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Brecky.
Just a couple more questions about the housing issue, the construction issue, the cost of construction going up. I'm concerned about the permitting process, and I'm wondering if the administration is sharing my concern. I kind of had just a feeling that, some things had kind of gotten high, and we had a lot of permits, and then I went to Michael Bender's market breakfast, and he showed a slide, and he made a note, and there were some other city people there than me that said, and it was diplomatic. He just said, take a look at this. And per $1 million spent, the number of permits that Sioux Falls has in order to spend that $1 million versus, our comparable cities. And we were off the charts. And so it kind of confirmed a gut feeling that I had. And I'm just wondering is there any interest with the administration in looking at that? And if there is, I would like to offer, I would be glad, more than happy to take a look at that with you. And what are your thoughts on that? Because that all does affect that that affordability issue, that the growth of, the costs of growing, both in the private sector, both in the housing issue, but also in the retail and business growth as well.
Right. We would absolutely be interested in looking into that further. I think it might be a good conversation outside of this realm to start so that we can walk through the process associated with, the commercial permitting system or process, I should say, is a little bit different than housing. And so I think Michael Bender's, presentation was maybe geared a little bit more toward the commercial side of it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that particular slide that he showed was
Right.
geared toward the commercial.
And I think if we went through that process and we could help explain that a little bit better, but it might take a few more minutes than what we have today, but
Oh, yeah.
absolutely interested in doing that.
Well, and I think it also just goes, to code enforcement in general. You can accomplish a lot of things with code enforcement, so we need to kind of focus on what it is I think we've just evolved and we're at a certain place with it, but I think we need to kind of focus on what it is we are trying to achieve with it. And, I think that there's, just opportunities there. So again, I would just reach out and say if you're interested in having any help to look at that, I'd be glad to look at that. But overall, I really appreciate the presentation. I was at a engagement where the mayor actually spoke, on the one, and he just kind of did a general thing, and he's, was saying more to come, and I think I've been just antsy, waiting for what else you guys been doing, because I know you've been working on this for some time, and I think it's a really good, I think it's probably the first time anything like this has ever been done, and it's really good to shape the city and have a specific direction. And then just exciting to have some of these goals that, as a council we can get behind, as departments we can get behind together. Our budget discussion is timely. We're kind of novices at this, and, but I do think, several of the things that came up on our list, can be, integrated in, as we prioritize, what our ideas are, into what most of your goals are as well. Thank you.
Anything else from the council? I'll just add my 2 cents. I appreciate the presentation. It's really all-encompassing. It really is a long-range strategic plan for every single department as we're moving forward, because as you said, 2019, 2020, 2022, all of the different dates in which you're touching for each department and bringing them together, because so many of them do commingle, when you're talking about the fire and police and their facility that they need as they move forward. And most of these items I have heard every single one of us talk about at some point and certainly have an interest in. And so I'd encourage you to involve the council when it's appropriate, because a lot of them will need funding, a lot of them will need just additional eyes and ears. And so when it makes sense, please feel free to reach out to any council member to connect with them. The other thing I would encourage is to continue to work with the county, the school district, and the state. Oftentimes when we look at, hey, we need a new facility, well, maybe the state does too, and if they're willing to put in $5 million, that just increases the investment that much further. And so I think we've struggled, really. It's just we kind of get in our lane and we just do it versus asking, hey, who wants to be a part of this maintenance building or whatever it is. So I thank you for that. I think that there's so many good things that will come out of this, and it really isn't going to all happen tomorrow, but over many years. And so thank you for that. I appreciate you being here. And as you said, counselors, feel free to reach out to Erica, and she can connect you to whomever has the information that you might need. So with that, we'll move on to item C, budget discussions by the City Council. Dave Bixler, I'll ask you to make, I don't know, just stay by. You might need to be close by for the work that you had put in for this. I'll ask Councilor Staley if you want to go ahead and take the floor.
Well, and I guess I would like Dave Bixler to come on up. We were just, Dave, the information that do we have a summary that you gave? Nobody has anything here in front of them?
Dave Bixler, City Council Budget Analyst. So what this is it's the accumulation of everyone's scoring that put in a score or rated these different projects, and by the weight that they put them in, and that is how it's laid out. And it gets kind of watered down because there are a number of different initiatives, and also the fact that there were a number of added initiatives that weren't on the initial list.
And I've got a question as to why, like, the votes on like renovate and repair Frank Olson Pool would be scored with
People
less.
voted for that, and
Right.
but that in the total ranking of all the scores, that's where it fell in at.
Right, but how did you come upon what the weight of it would be? You gave funding for long range, that one person voted for that, it got 3%, and then 2 people voted for Frank Olson, that got 2.5%.
If you rated your projects 10-1, 10 carries a bigger weight, or if you want to look at it reverse, 1 to 10, the highest level project gets the most points, and that's how it's rated.
Well, and we're going to, the purpose of this was to bring us all together to give some input, and I thank you for assisting with that. As we hand this off to our finance department, I would ask them to look maybe at I think 6 counselors participated in this, is that correct?
Correct.
6 people gave feedback. So I still would say if 2 people voted for something, that would carry a little more weight than one person listing that as their number 10. Or if you have
Scoring is the
3
scoring.
people.
It's not, there's not a weighting in one way or the other. Everybody's got the equal amount of points. Where they scored them, that's where it fell in at.
Okay, so just for the public to know, the number 1 scoring that we got was for streets.
Correct.
Number 2, the triage center. Number 3, warming centers, Bishop Dudley. The State Theater was right up there, public transportation, addressing flood areas. And then there's a lot of them in our number 2 that got 2 points. Let me just read the address flood areas, affordable housing, 2 of us thought that was important. City's role in addiction, suicide, the Discovery District, Frank Olson, repairing Frank Olson Park, the Glory House, looks like.
From walkability on down,
Project
makes up
trim.
80% of the scoring, as I have indicated on that chart. That line designates that everything below that made up 80% of the scoring.
So I appreciate you doing this, and I'm glad we're going to be able to hand something off to the finance department on this.
You're welcome.
Just one question, or is it
Go ahead.
for questions? You know, since 2 people didn't do anything, is
your microphone on?
Yeah, sorry. Is there any reason why we can't, just extend it a week and let the 2 people, give them a little more time to add to it? It would be nice, to have everybody's input, because obviously 2 votes make a difference, So, I don't care if it's, if it's after the fact, if we delay it a little longer.
Councilor Sale.
Thank you. And Janet, I was one that did not respond. And one of the questions that I have with each one of these things, there is no cost associated with that. And that's what I was looking for, is if we, let's say it's Project Trim. And if I think that's important, I believe that I should be voting with a cost associated with that project. If it's a brand new pool, which I personally believe that we need, I can't in good conscience say that should be a priority if I don't know the cost. So that's why I did not participate in this. I was willing to listen to the discussion that other people would have. That's why I did not participate. And until the costs are associated with each project, I probably won't participate in the polling.
And I would just respond, I had that same struggle, because, you can see that this is mine down here. I think that, and I'm going to be presenting to you guys on my opportunity to attend the National Congress of Cities. I think we should have, a minimum at least 3 people going to that each year in addition to NLC, because it's quite a bit different, but it has tremendous value. But I thought, why am I having that in the budget discussion for the whole city? That's just kind of a discussion that goes with our budget. So it was weird for me to put that in my top 10, and yet I wanted it to be on there because I wanted to bring it forth to the council. So I get what you're saying. We do need to work on refining our process a little bit. But I mean, at the moment, I think it's more of a, it's turned into more of a goal-setting process than it is a budget-setting process. So we're saying these are the things that are important to us, and it's interesting to me, how they match up. And I just would like 100% feedback. If we're going to send it to, send it on to finance, it would be nice. But, so for those things that yeah, I kind of had to do it the same way. I mean, because it ended up being, some of the very general things, street repair, public transportation, those ended up being the big ones. And I think that's because those are the ones that, again, we're hearing from our constituents on. But I just did the best I could, because I do agree what you're saying. Was it our budget? Was it the city's budget? Was it even budgeting? We were really it really evolved more into let's set a few goals and just, have some dialogue. And so we can kind of come up with some sort of, pyramid as to where our priorities are.
Anyone else have anything? Councillor Staley, I'll go back to you.
Well, and Councillor Sale, I will just compare this to what we just heard from Erica Beck, administration goals. She came up and showed us what they're hoping to do, their priorities. I asked her a specific question about cost, and what did she say to me? She doesn't know, because it's still in flux. They're listing the things they're planning to do. If I would have asked her, I'm sure, about what the cost of that new public safety center is going to be, we don't know for sure yet. But they're still talking about it. They're still saying this is a priority and it's probably going to be in the budget. So the same thing, I don't know how much it's going to cost to repair Frank Olson Pool. I don't know Keene Park, what that cost would be. I'd be a fool to say I think and we tried to do that with the pothole. We tried to give them $500,000 extra to put in the budget, and you said we shouldn't do that. That's their decision to make. So what we're doing is we're just saying these are important to us. In my 3 years on the council, and before that, watching city government, being here for many meetings, participating in the Snowgate debate, I can tell you that it's never been done before. So for us to be out on the front end saying these are important, we're hearing from our citizens, we want to tell the city this is an important thing now, is a good thing. And I would have appreciated it if you could have participated. It's your right not to, I guess, but I'm glad I'm glad we had this discussion. I think it's very positive.
Councillor Selberg.
Yeah, I think it's good for conversation. I was all supportive of the little sit-down we did a month ago, and I think this was a nice conversation, but we did clearly spell out that this was optional. Feedback was at your discretion, and nothing mandatory here. So if somebody doesn't want to chime in, they certainly don't have to. It would be my input, but if you want to, great. But I do think it was a good way to kind of get a little bit of a list and a conversation piece. So I kind of see both sides of it. So, but that's exactly how this whole thing was laid out. Let's talk about it, but if you want to fill out a survey, that's completely at your discretion.
Anyone else? Councillor Brecky.
I just suggest we take an extra week, before we send it anywhere. And again, I don't care, and nobody has to disclose whether they did or didn't, but, for those that, and if they were interested, I think they understand more now, because it's kind of a work in progress, what the purpose of the vote at this juncture is. It's just more of a prioritization of those issues that are important to you. And again, we added a couple, and so they can add them as well. And just, quietly give the other two people an opportunity, and if they don't, then we can send it as is. But that's what I'd like to do, if anybody doesn't have any objection to that.
Well, and if I may just say, the ranking system, I think moving forward, let's to maybe instead of listing it as the top 10, just listing your top 10. I was kind of thinking it as my top 10 priorities. I wasn't thinking that number 10 was going to be given more weight than number 1 or whatever. I was just, personally, I was listing the things that were important to me. So apparently you took that in a different way, right?
Well, some individuals did express it in that fashion, that was their priority list. And so that's how I kind of considered it when everybody sent their list in. If they said this was my number 1, so.
But so, I mean, if we would have had 5 people who said they wanted something, those 5 people, it wouldn't carry, the person who said number 1, that one person would carry more weight than the 5 people who said it was number 10.
I suppose.
Counselor Kiley? No, nothing. Nothing? Oh, sorry. I thought you had your hand up earlier, my bad. Anyone else? All right, thank you, Dave Bixler, for your work on that and helping us through that. The next item is letter D, City Council Leadership Election Ordinance. Counselor Brecky.
So you should all have a packet of information which shows you a little history and then just a little background information for this ordinance. I just kind of stumbled into this and just started researching the history and then checked on what was being done in some other communities, which again, you'll almost always see that whenever I'm bringing anything forward that actually deals with government structure. I like to look at what other cities do. It's moderately helpful, but at least you get to see the realm of what's out there. Sometimes it's just spot on. It just kind of is very clear. This was another one where it's kind of all over the board. So at the end of the day, you kind of end up, making your own unique decisions. But what I have laid out before you is an ordinance proposal, and it's just to codify our election process. It really is a classic standard Robert's Rules of Order election procedure. I work closely with Jim David and Tom Greco, and there's nothing really terribly unique about it, but it did flesh out some previous resolutions. The only real substantive change is that I changed the actual election date, or I proposed changing the election date from having it the evening that we're sworn in. We were sworn in at 2 o'clock, and we had the election of officers that same evening as one of the first items on the first agenda we received. And I just extended that out a month. I thought, personally, I wanted to go a little further. I wanted to actually do it to July, because I thought, you should have 2 months to kind of get to know each other and just kind of get your legs on the ground and actually be an official member of the council, before you have to make, a very important decision. But then I realized, okay, now we're getting into the budget, and I know Christine, in an earlier time, you raised issues about, getting the committees set up and people on the committees. And so I just slid back to the middle and thought, a June date at least would give you 1 month, to, have access to your fellow council members, when you were officially a council member, and be able to just, be prepared, to cast your vote in an election. So that's the only real substantive change, and I don't think it's really dramatic. It just allows at least a small amount of time to get to know your fellow council members when you are actually, a sworn council member yourself. So just the history, I think it's kind of interesting, and when I found some things, it actually flagged my memory a little bit. I'll start you back with, it's in the order that I'll speak I'll speak in the order of the items that I put before you. This city attorney opinion number 97-2 that was requested from the mayor and council members, an official request to the city attorney's office, what would be an appropriate procedure. So this would have happened in 1997, so this would have been kind of around the first, those first years where they were trying to, organize themselves. And if you read it, it's just, I think it's interesting. And I will tell you again, it flagged my memory. And I do remember that initially the council members chose a Native American procedure of passing a feather. They actually wanted to share the leadership, and they didn't want to have an election, and they just wanted to pass the feather, and they were going to do it, I believe, in year terms. And then what happened is someone didn't want to lead. There were some people in the council that said, I'm not interested in leadership, I don't want to lead. And so that they decided they needed to come up with a regular procedure. And so then I think this is probably when this request came. And it also made me remember, as you'll note in there, they were interested in doing a secret ballot. And that's because they didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings by actually having to say who they were voting for. But, the opinion came down, that's a clear no. I mean, the public has a right to know, and you have to stand up for who you're voting for. So that was a clear no. They needed to do it out in front of the public. So
That was what was recommended in 97. I think they must have just followed that for several years, but I do remember this as well. And I would follow up, then there, 4 years later, then, we must have got another request again because there came a memorandum that actually just proposed a process, which is all leading up to me why I'm wanting to put this in an ordinance, because obviously this is, it's a procedure that we follow. I think it needs to be an ordinance, and because it's kind of bounced around from memo to, and then you'll see later resolution. And so just having a regular procedure and ordinance, I think, is important. But I do remember on the first election that Mayor Gary Hansen was there, and it busted down in a 4-4 vote. And Gary they were all shocked. Nobody really expected that. Nobody talked about that in advance. And Gary just looked up and said, okay, guys, I am not going to elect your leadership. He said, you guys got to figure this out yourself. And he passed the gavel. He said, I just don't think it's appropriate for me to select your leader. So he left. And so after that, I think it was the practice for at least a while to not have the mayor present. However, it didn't show up in this memo in 2001. That really doesn't show up until the resolution 3610, which happened during Munson's administration. So that issue must have either came up again, or that was the practice of not having the mayor there, and somebody was wondering why, and so they decided to codify it. And the only difference between those 2 years was there was a roll call vote initially, again, where they state the name of the people they're voting for, and then under the Munson administration, it switched to just voting by voice vote, and that's how it was done, the last time, where we just voted all ayes, all nays. And I think that going back to, again, more of a standard Robert's Rules procedure is probably just a little better way of doing it. And so basically what I did is I took this history and I, again, just put together a standard procedure and just fleshed out, kind of those two, a combination of what we've kind of been doing anyway, and just added a little more information to it, a little more clarity to it, just embellished it a little bit, by putting in the more detailed things that you would find if you consulted Robert's Rules. So that's it. If you've got any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Maybe you'll ask questions about this, the successor language, but what that language is designed to do, that language in conjunction with another section of the code should take care of any interim or short-term vacancies. So that's what those procedures are designed to do. If you've got any questions about that, how an interim vacancy would be filled for either terming out or, resigning or anything like that. So yeah, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Councilor Brecky. Any questions for Councilor Brecky? Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, I guess I was busily making notes and stuff, but I didn't hear what you said, but just glancing at the cities, it looks like pretty much all of them vote on this, am I reading that right, on the same day that they're sworn in, like we do, or not? Or am I haven't read deep into it, but.
One that didn't, but maybe it's been a while since I looked at that.
Okay. I mean, it's just guidance of how other cities do it, but I do have a question. I don't know who can answer this. When we do, obviously it's been about 3 years, when we have orientation and they call us in, are we briefed at all about that we're going to be electing? Because I remember being contacted shortly after being elected and getting a bit of a primer, but whether or not we were briefed as far as, we're going to be electing a chair and a vice chair, so you need to start preparing for that. And if not, we ought to have something like that.
We were not, because I scolded Tom Greco about that. And you did say that you would do that in the future.
Yeah,
it was not part of our orientation.
Yeah, that would be a great thing to get in there, just so people just have visibility to that, new members. So just a suggestion.
That's already on his list.
Okay, fair enough.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Sale.
I was told that I would be voting for leadership.
Okay.
Oh, at the orientation you were?
Yeah, and I believe that's because I had it after you.
Oh,
But that was about the
Probably.
extent of it. Yeah, you're going to have to vote for leadership.
okay.
So
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Well, maybe just something in print, as part of a packet, if it doesn't already exist. They might be.
And I think that would be appropriate, regardless of the date.
Yeah,
Because even if it's, again, I think it's just, common sense to begin engaging in that kind of activity, before you're even an official council member, and having to make that, I think, important decision, on that first that first meeting night was, I think this would be, it's just I think a month, you know, is certainly not too much time to ask to do that. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, and just to finish that thought, yeah, I think we must have had, what is it, 6 weeks if we don't have a runoff? How much is it if it's a runoff? 2 weeks?
3.
3 weeks? Okay. Yeah, so that's the thing is if we can get people to hit the ground running, that's a decent amount of time to kind of start having discussions at least. You're not going to know people completely well, but just a thought. And you indicated that there's things that you could talk about, start meeting with other counselors even before you're sworn in, if you're aware, and you know, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you add that to the orientation process, then really I've got my 2 months. I would, again, I said I would have preferred July, but, you know, really this does give you the 2 months, pretty much. Again, it depends if someone's involved in a runoff, then it really doesn't. But, you know, it gives you a little extra time then if it's part of the orientation, so.
Counselor Kiley?
Thank you. And I'll just clue in because Councilor Brecky and I had an opportunity to discuss this. And I don't really have any problem putting in ordinance the process that we already have in place as a policy, but I did question the need to move back voting for leadership 4 weeks. And I'll use myself as an example, and I think just about everybody else in this council followed a similar process, but from the time I had announced my candidacy in February, I attended every informational meeting, every committee meeting, every council meeting for the next 2.5 months or 3 months up until the election. And then following the election, once I was elected, I knew with certainty that I was going to serve on the council. And so I had 6 weeks then to make myself available to council members that would be continuing from my time of installation forward. And I had already developed relationships even during that period from February to April. So I just question the need for the extension, but like I've mentioned previously, I don't have any problems with putting this into ordinance.
And I guess, yeah, my response would be, you know, I get it. Other cities do it too. But this is one of those areas I don't think there's, you know, there's any harm in venturing out on your own on this. And I think, you know, to me it was, you know, my experience was different. To me it was awkward having meetings with people before I was actually even sworn in, having meetings, you know, and for me, before I cast my vote, I wanted to interview, you know, who the potential, you know, candidates were going to be. I wanted to, you know, ask them questions. And it was just awkward, you know, trying to do that when you hadn't even been sworn yet in yet. It was just an awkward position. So, you know, but it's, you know, I get what you're saying as well.
And Madam Chair, if I may, and I remembered one other point that we discussed too in the event if you had a sitting council chair that was term limited or was not reelected, then it would create a void in the council chair position, which would force you to have I believe you termed it a special election, and then 4 weeks later do another election. So I question how you would be prepared to vote in a special election if you're not prepared to have the normal election at that particular point in time. So I just see that it could be potentially problematic. Actually, this next election, it's very possible that we won't have any changeover whatsoever. And so you would know. I mean, it's possible that we would have changeover. That's yet to be determined. But thank you for the contact. I appreciated that.
Any other questions, statements? Counselor Selberg.
I appreciate the work you put into it, and I know you've reached out to everybody, and that's terrific. So thank you for doing all that in your work. I'm kind of on the fence a little bit too on the timetable, just with the fact that I know last year after you got elected, and as the times were coming up, I think you and I sat down 2 or 3 times for pretty extended periods of time before you were sworn in. So I think you and I got to know each other pretty well. You took the initiative to reach out and meet people. So I do think that it's kind of like Councilor Kiley has said too. I think a lot of people when they get pretty engaged, especially when they're running, and you'll see them at the meetings and taking notes and visiting with counselors and doing that type of thing. So I think the opportunity is there to get to know people. I don't know necessarily that I'm completely against moving it to June either, but there's some things between the timing, like you say. Let's say somebody gets defeated or they're out, what do you do in that meantime? We've got committees that you have to fill. What do you do in the meantime with that if somebody's off of that? So I think there's a couple questions yet to probably fill in, but
I think.
it's a good discussion. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think, did you get the email that I sent you explaining how 2B would be implemented? So there would be sort of a passing of the gavel procedure if there was a termed out situation?
I did get that.
Okay. So I think all the vacancy issues are handled, but you're right, under certain hypothetical situations, you have to have a couple of elections close together, but I actually see that as a benefit, because, the person earns the right to that partial term, through a full-fledged election, and it's not that complex of a process. I mean, it's just, it's on the agenda and we do it. And then they earn the right to the full term. So they have to run again to do the full term. And maybe, at that point they win or not win, but they've earned, that privilege by running twice. And I don't see that as a bad thing, so.
Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, so most of this I think I have no problem with. I think, and we talked about this too, because you were nice enough to call, that it's the May-June thing is continuing to be a balancing act. I mean, there's the benefit that you have versus I keep thinking of different scenarios, like for example, the chair and vice chair both term limit out, are defeated, then I think you do have a vacuum where somebody has to be elected to fill at least the chair position.
If the chair and vice chair, are not elected, let's say they don't win election, they were voted on before, then you have a situation where you implement, is it 2B, Jim?
It's right here, upon the vacancy.
Yeah, upon the successor takes place, right. So the person either stays in office, if there's someone in office, stays in office, or it's basically kind of the acting mayor section that takes place, where the council just decides who will handle the election meeting, and then you have the election.
Well, actually, so yeah, I think it is covered in 2B. In the event of an interim vacancy, a vice chair or both chair and vice chair, a special election shall be held to fill the remainder of the term. So I guess I'm trying to get, like, for example, a lot of times a chair and a vice chair might have seniority and they might be term limiting out. So they both term limit out, let's say. So then at the next election, or not election, the next council meeting when the new people take over, presumably there has to be a special election to elect at the very least an interim chair for that month.
Yes.
Correct? Yes. Yeah. So I guess, so that is part of my struggle, is that then puts us in the position of we end up having to do it twice, and I wish it wasn't, because I don't think it's really that I gotta be careful, that big of a deal, but sometimes these things can get contentious, and I do worry about, that a new council starts off, and I shared this with you, you start off a new term with basically two potential, and I hate that it even happens, but battles, as it were, about elections, and sometimes it's, the one is hard enough. And the next one, the first one that gets put in the interim may have a leg up because they've now done it for a month. I suppose unless they do terrible, then they don't. But so that's the balancing act of,
Well, another method which was explored in this process was the drawing of lots. That's a totally generic way of dealing with an interim situation. But I guess as the discussions rolled out, it was more of liking the idea of having someone elected to that position and not just in it by chance, because that lot situation gives a person a leg up without earning it. So at the end of the day, I think those of us that were working on this like the election process better because, they have to earn it, and yes, because I think one thing to understand is the election process is not like this complicated process. We put it on the agenda and we do it. It takes, 15, 20 minutes, so, when you say election, I think it connotes all this, complex strategic stuff, but for us to elect our leadership, in a couple of series, in that chance when these vacancies could occur, it's not going to happen that often, and when it does, we just do it. So.
And that's fair. The other thing I guess I would say, and this kind of tags off of, I think, what maybe Councilor Kiley was talking about, it also works in the direction that it really is up to the candidate to do the legwork. They really need to, if they want to do it, they need to do the reach out, and it's going to be their responsibility to contact the person who was just elected and say, hey, let's sit down for coffee, and kind of give them their, and do a get to know you, which you should be doing anyway. So that, I think it really falls on the shoulders of who wants to be in it as much as, if not, well, probably more than the new person who really shouldn't be expected to. How are they supposed to know all of the ins and outs? So, just a statement.
Sorry, anyone else? Okay. Thank you, Councilor Brekke.
Thank you, everyone.
Councilor Kiley. Oh, I'm sorry, public comment. I'm sorry. Is there anyone here for public comment? Sorry, thank you.
Scott Erisman, Sioux Falls. It's really unfortunate that I've been watching the council elections for the chair. It's become really political. Kind of all started when Pat Costello was running for mayor, and he would remind everybody when he was running that he was council chair. And I've looked at it as a thing that you pick the person who's going to best whip the votes for the mayor. That's what it has been over the last, I think, 8 years. And it's become too political. I think it'd be really easy just to go, who's ever next in line, who's ever been here the longest, they get to be chair. If they don't want to be chair, they refer it to the person behind them. If they don't want, they refer it to the next person behind them. And if it's two people that have been here for the same amount of time, you take the at-large person because they represent more voters, they get preference, or you flip a coin instead of voting on it and making it a big political thing. It's kind of silly. You were talking about earlier in the big, hairy, audacious goals, or whatever the heck the mayor's calling that stuff, about the downtown development. And I've been saying for a long time that TIFs don't work, and it's not my opinion. It's the opinion of dozens of studies I've read across the country. Like I said, don't take my word for it. Go read them yourself. And I don't think the city should be giving out any more TIFs until a comprehensive study is handed over to the public and the city council that says, this is our economic payback we've had from TIFs. We've had nothing. No stats, no data, nothing that tells us that all these TIFs we've been giving out have given us anything back. Nothing. Maybe it has, I don't know. But if you read other studies across the country, they'll tell you all the same thing. They either give very little, nothing, or they almost never give back the full amount of payback. So I would be interested to say no more TIFs until we have a full comprehensive study on what jobs we've gotten, what kind of tax base we've been brought in. There's also talk about the workforce development. We constantly beat this over the head that we need workforce development. It's real simple. It's not a real hard math thing to do. Higher wages. We need to encourage higher wages, period. It's really that simple. It's not task force and let's get a study group together. No, we need to kick these business owners in the butt and start telling them to pay living wages, period. The city employees are union. I'm sure they're very happy about that. We need to expect the same out of the business owners we're going to attract to the city. If we don't, it's not going to improve. It just isn't. There was a guy that came and talked to Rotary, I think, last year. I forget his name. But I think he was the chair of he's a bigwig with the federal government. He's a chair of the banking, the federal banking something. And he flat out told the Rotary, if you can't get workers in Sioux Falls, I'll tell you why, because you're not paying enough. And the crowd went quiet. As for, I was looking at the budget, the budget priorities. I found it interesting that the State Theater came in fourth. It's really surprised me. With all the issues we have going on in Sioux Falls, the State Theater was rated fourth. Kind of interesting. I think that survey, I agree with Janet, I think you should redo it. I think you all should retake it. I think it's disappointing that 2 counselors decided not to take it, but it goes back to what I've always said. There's 2 kinds of city councilors. There's ones that want to help people, and there's ones that want to help themselves. And you can decide who those are. But we need to do something different when it comes to these budget priorities, because I don't understand how a private nonprofit theater is rated as our 4th #1 budget issue in the city of Sioux Falls. How does that even get there? How did it even get on the radar is what I want to know. Puzzles me. And I still think that we need to change the TIF program to do fix up neighborhoods. And I know that you guys talked about that today, and that's great. So good.
Any other public input? Seeing none. Councilor Kiley.
Madam Chair, I move to enter into executive session for the purpose of consulting with legal counsel or reviewing communications from legal counsel about proposed or pending litigation or contractual matters pursuant to SDCL 125-2-3.
Second?
It's been a motion to move into executive session. If you are not supposed to be here, please exit the room, and we will go into executive session very shortly. Thank you.
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Council members Brecky,
Yes.
Erickson,
Yes.
Kylie,
Yes.
Nitzert,
Yes.
Elberg,
Yes.
Sale,
Yes.
Starr,
Yes.
Staley.
Now we will ask the room to be exited. Thank you. Sorry.